welcome to FrankieSense and More. It's Frankie's guest host, Danielle Findlay, and I'm here with Brent Marchant. This is our first time working together, Brent, and I'm really excited about it, talk about some movies. I was going to have my bag of popcorn here ready for you, but it is early morning where I am in Western Canada, and I thought it might be a little bit early for some popcorn, but that's not to say when I was watching these movies, I was powering through the chocolate and popcorn and feeling like I was back in the movie theaters. So I'm here with Brent today, and Brent Marchant is a movie critic and correspondent, and also the author of 3 books: Get the Picture, Conscious Creation Goes to the Movies, Consciously Created Cinema, The Movie Lover's Guide to the Law of Attraction, and third reel, Conscious Creation Goes Back to the Movies. Did I get that all right, Brent?
That's correct.
Awesome. Well, I'm just going to give you a brief introduction of who I am. My name is Danielle. As I mentioned, I've known Frankie for over 20 years. Frankie and I worked together when I lived in Toronto, and she's a huge mentor of mine and just a lovely, lovely lady. And when she reached out to me and asked me if I would take over today, I gladly accepted. I have a background in marketing and communications. I also love to write. I currently own a Pilates and wellness studio here in the beautiful Rocky Mountains in Canmore, Alberta. And I'm a movie lover. So this is really awesome. This has been really fun to go to watch these movies. So I'm going to leave it with you. I'm going to pass this over to you to give it a start.
Well, welcome to the show, Danielle. It's great to have the opportunity to work with you on this.
Oh, I'm so excited.
It's always wonderful to work with another fellow movie lover. And that's something that we do once a month here on FrankieSense and More. So with that in mind, let's have at it.
Let's start. Yeah.
Okay. So our first offering today is a film that comes from Norway. It was the country's official selection for the Oscars. It didn't get nominated, but that's because there was a tremendous crop of foreign films last year, so it really faced a lot of stiff competition. But it has gone into general release now. It's available in theaters where theaters are open, as well as streaming online. And the name of this film is called, very simply, Hope.
I'm going to move my screen here. I'm going to share it. Let's see. I want to give you a video. I'm going to move this here. Well, I have it on my screen, Brent. Please forgive me. This is technology that I love so much. Here we go. Okay, share screen. Let's go here. Perfect. Let me know. Make sure that you can see that.
Yes, there we go.
Okay,
yes,
perfect. Okay.
So Hope tells the story of a couple that has been together for many, many years, Anya and Thomas. And they've both developed very successful careers in their respective fields. She's a choreographer and he's a theatrical producer. And even though they've been together for a long time, they've had 3 kids. They've developed a blended family because he has 3 kids also from a previous marriage. They've grown apart over time because they've been very preoccupied with what they've been doing in their work lives. And it's not sure, exactly what the state of the future of the couple is going to be. Well, that gets really thrown into doubt even further when, unfortunately, Anya receives a diagnosis of a malignant, incurable brain tumor. She had been treated for lung cancer a year earlier and was thought cured, but it came back with a vengeance and was discovered when she began having problems with headaches and vision problems and so forth. And it's determined from her doctor that it's not clear exactly how long she's got. Now, you would think that automatically this would draw a couple together very tightly, but given the fact that they've been drifting for a while, it's not really sure exactly if she feels that she can trust Thomas to be there to support her during this. And she's not even sure that she wants him there, which seems kind of, might seem kind of strange to some people, but the distancing has become so profound that they really don't have a really strong relationship anymore. So the question is, will this crisis end up, definitively split them apart for good? Or will it help to draw them back together closer for whatever time that she has left? And one of the big questions that comes up in the course of all this is, will they take the final step that they've never taken prior to this point, and that's getting married. They've been living together as an unmarried partnered couple, but not a married couple all this time. And now they're facing that crisis on top of everything else. And it's just a big, full plate for each of them to have to deal with. So this film takes viewers through all of the steps that each of them is facing in terms of what they're dealing with in terms of their relationship, what they're dealing with in terms of their relationship with their children, and just whether or not there's even going to be much of a future in terms of time left given the state of her condition. As noted, the doctors have said that it is incurable, but there is the possibility that treatment may help to prolong her life for some time. They don't really know that until she goes through a number of tests and so forth. But it's a movie that really tugs at the heartstrings a lot. And it will send you on a roller coaster of emotions, from hopefulness to despair to sorrow for all the pains that they've been going through, not just now, but also for apparently many years. And those are issues that have not been satisfactorily addressed or even resolved up until now. But they're at a point where really, if they're going to do it, now is the time, because there really doesn't appear to be a lot of time left. So this is a really very strong film, particularly in its performances. The portrayal turned in by Andrea Hovig, who plays Anya, is just stellar. I mean, really fine work. It's really beautifully filmed. It's set during the holidays, so it has a beautiful production design in terms of the set decoration and so forth. It's a really good movie. It's kind of a shame that it got shut out from Oscar contention, but like I said, it was up against a lot of competition last year. That doesn't mean it isn't worth seeing. I definitely recommend it, but definitely keep the box of hankies handy. Yeah. I mean, you will need it, because it's that kind of movie.
And why did you pick this movie for May? What with all the movies that are available, why this one?
Well, right now, since we're coming to sort of the bottom of the barrel of the releases that were made prior to the COVID pandemic.
Yeah.
We're getting, like I say, we're kind of getting to the bottom of the available supply of what was made prior to the crisis. And the cycle for making new productions is just really starting to get ramped up again. So this one kind of was one of the available options, at a time when the supply was running out. Because it didn't get an Oscar nomination, it sort of got put on the back burner. But now that the Oscars are over with, it was a time for any of the quote unquote leftovers to be able to be put into the marketplace for viewing. And this is a movie that is available, as I think I mentioned, for both theatrical and online streaming at this point. So in places where theaters are open, you might actually be able to go and see this in a movie house. If not, you can certainly find it online from a number of different movie streaming services. I also, picked it because it's a really well-made movie. I mean, I really love to see good films get recognition, and I make a point of trying to address them in whatever reviews I write for my blog website, or, in the segments I do on here. I really like to see these good quality films get their due.
Yeah, no, I really appreciated the movies that you've picked. I've spent so much time watching mainstream movies. My husband is a huge movie buff, but he keeps it pretty mainstream. And I love art cinema. I love independent film. So with many of these movies, pretty much all of them, I actually had to step away to step back into it and look at it completely different, because I became really cynical, stereotypical. Like, it was really interesting, the personal emotions that I went through with each one of these movies. But I did see a theme in all of them, and I miss movie theaters. I miss going to the movies, Brent. It's just not the same watching a movie at home for me personally. I know that a lot of people prefer to be in their jammies, be at home in their lazy boy, and I respect that. But I love it's part of the journey, it's part of the adventure is going to the movies, and I really do miss that.
Oh, I definitely agree with you on that. I admit I grew somewhat comfortable with streaming over the past year
Mm-hmm.
in a way that I didn't prior to that point and didn't think I would until I actually started doing it. But once theaters began opening up here in Chicago, which was around the middle of February, I've been starting to go back to the theaters to see things. And
Oh,
when
you're
I
so
have,
lucky. You're so lucky. My studio is still closed. We're still right in the heart of a rollout and phases. Our numbers are contained and quickly depreciating or going down, but we're still a fair bit of ways from movie theater attendance again.
I was actually surprised that they opened up as early here as they did, because I'm finding out that in a lot of other American cities, they've only been opening up, say, the past month and a half. But like I say, we've been open for the most part almost since about the middle of February. Um, Now, at the times when I have gone to theaters, there haven't been very many people there. So,
Yeah.
it's not like I really had to worry about, the conditions in which I was watching the films, because in some cases it was maybe just me and my partner, you
Mhm.
know.
Yeah,
um,
absolutely. You had
you
it
know,
all to yourself,
yeah,
like movie
exactly.
house. Awesome. Well, on like how many stars would you give this movie?
I would give this probably 3.5 to 4 out of 5.
Ah,
Yeah, it's
nice.
very, very well done.
Nice. Well, it wasn't my favorite out of the six, but I did enjoy it. And it's very heartfelt and have that box of tissues for sure.
Absolutely. But one thing you were saying too about the selection of films that you like to watch, the art house films, the independents, the foreign films. One of the things that has been sort of a blessing in disguise because of the pandemic is those films got much more exposure over the past year through streaming than
Truth.
they
Yep.
probably typically would have if they were relying exclusively on theatrical distribution. And that's been a good thing because it's helped to raise the profile of these films, and I'm really
Mhm.
glad to see that. I think a lot of times movie viewers are missing out on a lot by not being
I
able to
agree.
either avail themselves of these films or have access to
Yeah.
them. And now that the streaming services have really stepped up, help make
Absolutely.
these films available, viewers really don't have any excuse for not seeing them anymore unless they're just not looking for them.
I agree.
You know,
Yeah.
so I'm really been very happy to see that, and yeah, it to me it's I think it's a good thing that they're getting their just due and won't necessarily be completely overshadowed by the mainstream commercial fare,
Yeah. No,
because
I totally agree.
the mainstream commercial fare in a lot of cases these days really leaves a lot to be desired.
Yeah,
So
you know what? It's good entertainment for sure. But I'm very thankful over the past 15 months to have Netflix and access to Amazon
yeah.
Prime and Apple TV and um, not just my regular satellite cable, if you will,
Well, and the
and the
thing is,
movie channels.
services like Netflix were in many ways ahead of the curve when
Oh
it
yeah. Do you
came
remember when you
to
used to have to mail, like send your requests and then they would mail? I'm dating myself, but and at that time it was like, what is this? But you're right, way ahead of the curve. It's almost like, yeah, it's almost like they knew, right? It's
well,
almost
especially
like they
when it
knew.
came to their streaming offerings, because when a lot of other distributors and studios had to face the issue of how do we get our movies into people's onto people's radar
Hmm.
during a time like this.
Hmm.
Netflix already had the infrastructure in place to do it. Like,
Absolutely.
okay, we'll just add it to our repertoire
Yep.
of streaming movies, and people can see it that way.
Hmm. No, it was really well done. Okay, well that's awesome, and I
Yeah.
like the rating system on that one. Let's move on to the next one.
Okay. So our next film is an independent film that was nominated for an Independent Spirit Award for Someone to Watch, and that's a film called Farewell Amore. This is the story of an African immigrant family that has been separated for 17 years. The husband emigrated from Angola to New York to escape the civil war that was going on there, and was spending time awaiting the arrival of his wife and daughter. And it took 17 years in order for it to finally happen. Well, you would think that this would naturally be a wonderful and warm time, but because they've been separated for so long, it's really almost as if they're strangers getting together again. And the film tells the story of this reunion, this long-awaited reunion, where they're having to kind of put the pieces back together in terms of rebuilding a family. And that doesn't always go as easily as you might think. Because they had been separated for so long, the husband had been starting to see another woman because he wasn't sure that his family would ever be able to join him again. And his wife, during the time when she was awaiting her immigration to go through, had become a very devout fundamentalist Christian and was constantly proselytizing to the point where it was driving her daughter and now her husband nuts with all the ongoing evangelizing. So the film basically tells the story of this family trying to work through all these things and come back together again. And it's a fairly simple story, but it's very well told. It's particularly interesting in terms of the way the story is told by dividing it into three segments where each one focuses on one of the three principal characters. And you end up seeing, you don't get to see the entire big picture of the story as each of these segments is portrayed. They kind of end up getting pieced together like a puzzle, where you find out some things that you didn't know previously about one of the characters until it's revealed maybe in the next segment. So you end up seeing you see the story unfold for yourself, kind of in the same way that the characters are seeing it unfold for themselves as the story plays out. It's a very clever way of telling the story. The director ended up winning the Independent Spirit Award for Someone to Watch. I'm really very pleased to see that happened, because this is a little known film that really deserves a lot more attention than it got. Apparently, it did have a very brief theatrical release back last fall, right before theaters closed down a second time. So it really didn't get a lot of play with the public, and went into streaming at that point. But then it sort of got a boost in its profile when it picked up the Independent Spirit Award nomination. And I was really glad to see that, because this is a good film that really deserves more attention than it has gotten up to this point.
Hey, I got to tell you, this was my favorite out of the six. Oh, I loved this movie. It was the cinematography, the actors, the storyline. I really fell in love with this movie. I thought it was so well done. I loved just the storyline of it and the touching, of being an immigrant and the timeline between this husband and this wife and this relationship. And he, hadn't seen his family, hadn't seen his daughter, and how they adapted to living in the city and how he adapted to having them there. I loved it.
Well, and also, in immigrating, he gave up a lot as well, in terms of not just being separated from his family, but when he was in Africa, he had studied in college to become a journalist. He had to give that up. And when he came to New York, he had to take whatever job he could get to earn money and keep a roof over his head and, finance this effort to try and get his wife and daughter to come to America. And then he had to wait as long as he did. And then when he was finally reunited with his wife, he found that he was with a virtual stranger.
Yeah, absolutely.
And his daughter, he hadn't seen since she was a child. So she was a virtual stranger as well. How do you resolve a situation like that? It's not easy. The daughter also was not terribly happy about being in America, because she was missing all of her friends. And also she was an aspiring dancer, and her mother kept trying to keep her from,
Squash it.
yeah, I mean, trying to keep her from getting involved in the evil ways of this art form. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
you know, so it really has a lot that it's that the characters are working through as they come through this film. And again, this is one that I recommend very, very highly. It's a shame that it kind of got lost in the shuffle as everything was unfolding with the pandemic and the release schedule and so forth. But it's a great film. You know,
Oh,
go
it's
see it.
beautiful. Yeah, I completely agree with you on that. It was really beautiful, very heartfelt, really touching. Um, and to see them all be strangers,
Yes.
and come together and how they did. And especially in New York. That's not the easiest place to
No.
come together in New York. So I really enjoyed it. And I thought the story was really well told. And it wasn't complex.
No.
Each character had their own story within the film that was so powerful, and they didn't compete with each other. They
Exactly.
didn't need
Well,
to.
this is a really good example of showing that a movie does not have to be complicated to be interesting.
Mm-hmm.
You can you can have a fairly simple premise and get a lot of mileage out of it in telling a good story just by letting those simple elements come together, come to the surface, and express themselves. And that's exactly what happened with this film. I mean, it was just really well put together, and it's a little predictable, and a little bit. There are some parts that are a little bit overly sentimental, but that, to me, that's easily overlooked in terms of everything else the film has to offer. So
I agree. It was really beautiful. And why did you pick this one?
I'm a big fan of making sure that films that are sort of the underdogs get recognition.
Mm-hmm.
And that's particularly true with independent films that have low budgets for marketing and distribution, and especially since it was facing the extra challenges that came with movies being released in the past year. But that's one of the things where the awards programs can really help a film get off the launching pad. Getting a nomination of one kind or another, in this case, actually winning the award, helped elevate its status considerably. And that's good to see, because that way the filmmakers get more recognition, and that helps them with getting, future projects off the ground. So
Yeah, no, it was really good. And how many stars would you give this one?
I gave it 4 out of 5.
Yeah, it was really good.
Yeah.
Really good. Okay, let's move on to the next one.
Okay, so the next one is a very unusual film that was just recently released. It's a documentary called In Silico. And this was the story of a young filmmaker who was very interested in the subject of neuroscience. And he had learned about a scientist who was very interested in trying to develop a computerized model of the brain in hopes that it would help to explain how various brain functions translate into the day-to-day activities, the behaviors, the ways of expressing ourselves that typically are associated with coming from the mind and coming from the brain. And it was a very ambitious project. The scientist said that he believed that it was entirely possible to develop this brain mapping project within 10 years so that you could have a working model on a computer of how the brain functioned. And as the story unfolds, you begin to find that despite a lot of early interested enthusiasm and backing for the project, it starts to get undermined by people who are skeptics, who question whether or not he's going to be able to achieve his time frame at all, let alone within the time frame that he's discussed. And it leads to some very kind of almost cutthroat kind of competition among scientists who are vying for grant money. So you end up seeing this very idealistic and noble science project being launched that suddenly starts getting bogged down in all of this kind of bureaucratic red tape in terms of whether or not it's even going to be able to continue going forward. it's a documentary that kind of takes a very interesting story that starts out in one direction and then goes in another halfway through. But it's at the same time, even if this is not the kind of story where you're going to get the resolution or the result that you think you're going to get when you start out, there's still something to be said for the journey that goes in terms of getting it launched. Where will it lead to? Will it lead to development and further exploration by later researchers? And would those later efforts even have gotten off the ground were it not for this groundbreaking effort to begin with in the first place? The thing I liked about this film is it takes some rather technical topics and explains them in very understandable ways. In terms of understanding the nature of the brain, the nature of the role of consciousness in it. And it's a really fascinating story within a story in terms of explaining not just the science behind it, but also the logistics associated with a project like this being carried out. I was surprisingly captivated by this as I was watching it, because I thought initially it sounded like a rather dull scientific slog, but it turned out to be a very human story in many ways. And, if you think about the brain being one of the characteristics that defines us as being human to begin with, well, then this movie takes that and illustrates it perfectly in many ways. So yes, this is a really interesting story and a really interesting documentary. It's not the kind of thing that I think I would have ordinarily liked, but really enjoyed in this particular context.
I'm a big documentary fan, and it took me a bit to get into this one for sure. It wasn't my favorite, but it was interesting. There's definitely, it made me think in on a completely different realm, if you will. But I agree with what you said. It took the scientific. I mean, it matched the scientific with the humanity or the human nature of it, which I really appreciated and respected.
Exactly. Well, when you think about some of the big scientific developments that we've had, development of flight, computers, all those sorts of things. We almost have to ask ourselves, where would we be if the backing wasn't there to make these things happen in the first place? And in some ways, that's kind of the central question that you're up against in connection with the study involved in this film too. Will we eventually find the answers that we're looking for in that regard? And if we do, how will that transform our lives? I mean, that's one of the things that I think really fascinated me a lot was in terms of understanding how the brain functions, how the mind functions. What can we do with that if we actually are able to develop a deeper and better understanding of it?
Absolutely.
And at some point you won't find out unless the project gets off the ground in the first place. And I think that's what the researcher was trying to do here. And then of course, the best laid plans get interrupted with things like, are we going to have enough money to do it? Are we going to have enough backing and support to do it? Are the critics going to drown us out as we try to go through this? Because this is an area where you're dealing with a number of subjects that the researcher mentions in the film, things like, science, philosophy, ethics. I mean, there's a whole bunch of things that factor into understanding something like this. And that was one of the things I enjoyed about the film, was seeing how these multifaceted issues got worked into the storyline for this particular subject.
I think that because of the work that I do, I never individualize the mind, the body, or the spirit. I never separate them. I keep them all together. My focus and my job is to align the three. So I appreciated it that it was very specific, and it was really, it took me out of what I do on a day-to-day basis because I don't separate the three, and to learn a little bit more about the scientific and just the foundation, and the brain.
Yeah, I tend not to separate them either. And it's interesting to see that, they want to try to figure out, okay, so what actually makes the brain work? Is there something about the consciousness
Yeah.
that comes into play that we don't understand? I think that's what they were actually kind of aiming to try and understand through this film. I mean, one of the points that's made early on in the film is the researcher was saying that one of the reasons why he wanted to investigate this was that he had a young autistic son.
Mm-hmm.
And he was wondering, why would somebody who has a quote unquote normal brain exhibit one form of behavior, while his son, who was autistic, had essentially the same organ inside his head, but exhibited a completely different type of
Absolutely.
behavior.
Absolutely. Yep.
And I think that is a fascinating subject in terms of trying to decide, why do we behave the way that we do? What prompts the differences between us?
Mm-hmm.
Of course, there's a dual-edged sword in that, and the fact that also becomes one of the criticisms of the project, saying, how can you possibly develop a map of all the different kinds of consciousness responses that would develop from the brain, given the variation that we see just in the nature of human behavior?
Mm-hmm.
That's a tough nut to crack.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And why did you pick this movie?
Oh, I was fascinated by the subject matter.
Yeah.
I mean, I didn't know how fascinated I was going to be until I started watching it. But like you, I'm also a big documentary fan, and I'm like to try and see films in that genre that take different perspectives on different subjects. And this one took one of the most unusual examinations of that subject than I had ever seen before.
Mm-hmm.
I had also seen another film by the same director. It was a fictional piece that came out last fall. Was released in a number of film festivals, called Lapsus. And it just recently received a brief theatrical run and is available for streaming online. And that too dealt with some very interesting subject matter regarding consciousness as it relates to technology.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, I mean, he's a very interesting way of taking that particular subject and making it look really, really different and really interesting. So he did a pretty good job of it in a fictional context, and want to see how he would do with a documentary. And I should add, in terms of the documentary, the researcher who began this project was trying to achieve his goal over the course of 10 years. So the director working on this film had been working on it for 10 years. I mean, that's quite a long time to remain committed to one project.
Absolutely.
And you not only saw his growth in terms of, in terms of investigating the subject matter of the film, but also you can start to see his growth as a filmmaker over the course of that time, because I believe he was 22 when he first started making this film. Mm-hmm. So it's interesting to see the embodiment of a filmmaker's evolution in the course of one.
Oh, yeah. And at a prime part of their lives as well.
Exactly.
And discovering who they are.
Exactly. While trying to do other projects too.
Yeah. That's quite the challenge there. I will definitely watch it again. I tend to do that with documentaries. A lot of movies I watch them twice, just because the first time it's like, how does it hit me? And then the second time it gets a little bit deeper. So it's one that I'll definitely watch again. And how many stars would you give it?
I would give this one 4.
Yeah,
also.
Good.
Yeah,
really
definitely.
Good. Okay.
Anyone who's interested in finding out more detail about the film and my take on it, I do have a blog about the film on my website at www.brentmarchant.com. So I go into a lot more detail on there. So feel free to have at it.
Yeah, please go to his website, and then they get to learn more about you as well, because you got your fingers in a lot of pots. You do a lot of stuff, which I really adore. Each time I open up your website, I learn something new about you. Okay, what's the next one?
Okay, so our next film, in honor of the upcoming Gay Pride Month, we have a delightful comedy called Straight Up. Now, this film actually came out about a year ago, but it really started getting some attention again through the Independent Spirit Awards competition, where it received a nomination for, I believe it was Best First Screenplay. This tells the story of a young, neurotic loquacious computer programmer who is, at the risk of being somewhat stereotypical, he's quite obviously gay, but he's not completely comfortable with accepting a lot of the things about the gay lifestyle. And he has been seeing a therapist about it, and he's been talking to friends about his situation. And he comes up with the theory that, well, you know, if I haven't really embraced it as readily as everybody thinks I should, maybe I'm not gay in the first place. Maybe I'm really a quote unquote latent heterosexual. So he decides that maybe he needs to start exploring life in the straight world. Well, he ends up not starting out very successfully, but then ends up meeting a woman who is in many ways very much the same kind of personality that he's got. And they end up having a number of dialogues where they end up debating intellectual topics and popular culture, and they speak with a rapid fire staccato kind of way of speaking. And they're as happy as clams with, you know, the conversations they have with each other. And there's really nothing really much beyond that in terms of any kind of physical contact, but they do end up developing quite a strong affection for one another. So they end up becoming an item and moving in together. And everything seems to be going well until they start to reach the point where they get talked out. And then, of course, the question comes up, what kind of future do they really have? And in terms of the lead character, it comes up with, is this really what he wants? Is this who he really is? And especially when he starts getting sort of tested on the nature of his orientation at some point, where he thinks, maybe I'm not as jaded or disenchanted with the gay lifestyle as I thought I was. Mm-hmm. But then what does that mean for me and the relationship I have with this woman who I'm trying to convince myself I'm really in love with? Mm-hmm. So it makes for a very interesting conundrum as he tries to work things out. It's a very funny film. I mean, there's a lot of really terrific, great one-liners. Some, not all of them land perfectly, but a lot of them are just spot on. And it's also kind of an interesting take that this is like a role switching type of film in terms of exploring sexuality, orientation, and our willingness to, you know, embrace this particular part of our lives. I should caution viewers that the language in this film is a little salty. And also some people might not be entirely comfortable with the perceived stereotyping, but, you know, there are people like that out there. It's not unrealistic. It's you know, it is something that people have to work through in terms of coming to understand themselves and understanding what they want for their lives, to achieve a level of happiness and satisfaction that sometimes is very elusive and hard to find, you know. So I really enjoyed this one a lot. I thought it was a fun film, and you know, it's I think it's going to become really one of the list of staples for movies in for Gay Pride Month over time. It's available for streaming. As I say, it did come out about a year ago, but its visibility profile has recently been raised, and with Gay Pride Month coming up, I'd say, you know, go see it, go watch it. You can watch it online. It's worth it.
It was the first one that I watched out of the 6, and I turned it off and then went back to it the next day. It really irritated me. It really, because of the banter, and it was just like, blah, blah, blah. And I was like, what is this? And I just was like, no, I don't want to watch this. And then I left it, and then I came back and I was like, okay, Danielle, why? Like, why is this? You know, it's a generational thing. It's I just felt it was like my little brother and my little sister, and I just wanted to tell them to shut up. And then I approached it a little bit differently, and I was like, ooh, this is a good one. And I really, there's a lot of things about this movie that I loved. I loved the softness of the setting. I loved the cinematography. I loved the soundtrack. Oh, I love the music in it. I loved the characters. I loved that it really came down to love. It really did. And they had to define it in their own terms. And each one of them was missing love in different ways, and they were leaning on each other. So when they started dissecting their own individual needs and what that meant to them, without having the input of their peers, their social setting, society telling them what's right and what's wrong, and the confusion and the conflict that both of them experienced throughout, because they really loved each other.
And sometimes, I think we have this kind of unrealistic expectation that, the skies are going to open, there's going to be hearts and flowers and romance that's going to come about all of a sudden. And sometimes it takes some time to get to that point, and it may not always come with the first person you meet. Mm-hmm. Sometimes you have to have transitional relationships that help you to discover who you are and what you want and what you don't want. And there's value to be had in that, even though it may not always turn out as successfully as one would hope. It still teaches you very important things about yourself that you didn't know previously and that you need to know going forward. I mean, I know in my own circumstance, I had been in prior relationships before meeting my current partner, and somebody said, well, how come it didn't work out with these other people? And it's like, they weren't the right people, but I didn't know that until I went through it.
Absolutely.
And
absolutely.
It was information that I carried forward into future relationships to, again, help me decide what can I rule out from the beginning? What do I need to make sure is included this time? But I wouldn't have known that had I not had those previous experiences. And that's one of the things that this film, definitely brings home, and sort of, shoves it in your face to say, don't necessarily expect perfection on the first try.
Yeah. I really felt for the characters. I felt for their pain. It was very visible, and it was really hard. Like, I felt it. I really resonated with the struggles that each one of them had in trying to understand and discover, because they're young and they're trying to discover who they are and what love means to them and what relationships and the status and, the wanting. They both want that relationship, but not with each other.
And I think also that those of us who are older and more experienced may look at this at first glance and say, oh, why don't they just grow up? Well, were we that mature?
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's why I had to turn it off, because I was like, well, this is ridiculous. And then when I went back and looked at it again, I was like, look at it from a different lens, Danielle. Look at it from that age, look at it from this timing in our lives. Look at it from just from a different perspective, which I did. And then I appreciated it. Then I really liked it, actually.
Yeah.
And as I said, I thought it was really funny.
Yeah.
It didn't offend me at all. I thought I just thought the acting and a storyline I thought was really quite on target.
I do understand the idea about the pacing of the dialogue and so forth being almost exhausting at times.
Yes.
But then I thought to myself, okay, so what is this? What was the purpose of this? And it reminded me that in many ways, this is almost kind of an homage to the screwball comedies of years ago.
Yeah.
And then it made sense. It's like, okay, so this is, doing a modern take on the kinds of really rapid fire funny movies that they did like in the 30s and the 40s. And if you look at it from that level, then it puts it in a new context.
Oh yeah, absolutely. But then I was pictured myself and I was like, if I was in that kitchen with them, what would I be saying? And it was like, no, I got to get out of here. You two are driving me insane. But I'm not there. And I really, the who they, like, just the whole circumstantial and right in those moments. I just pictured myself being the parent who was sitting there drinking wine, like that was where I pictured myself in the whole scenario. But it was
funny you mentioned parents too, because when there's a scene where they meet with his parents over dinner, I mean, his parents are a pair of kooks. I mean,
yes. Yeah. And just adoring. And I really just was like, oh yeah, that's where I am, right there, drinking wine with the mom. It was so good, but you can see why he has taken on so many of the characteristics as he does and why he needs a therapist. Yes. And I really adored the therapist and I really loved their relationship.
Yes. Yes.
Okay, why did you pick this movie? I think you went through that, but just going with my last two questions for each movie.
Well, the in terms of why I picked it, yeah, it's a with Gay Pride Month coming up, I thought it made a good choice for that. And in terms of my rating on it, I would probably give this 3.5
Yeah.
out of 5.
Yeah. I might even go a little higher. I probably at first I would have been like a 2, and then I might have gone a little bit higher. I thought as I said, I was drawn to many things, and I thought it was really a beautiful movie, like aesthetically pleasing to my eyes. I loved it. I loved that part of it. I just put it on mute. Okay, moving forward, we've got two more.
Yeah, 2 more. and actually my reason for picking these last 2 films, I'll address that up front, is the fact that they both deal with some similar subjects, but in very different ways.
Yep.
The first one that I picked was She Dies Tomorrow, which is a film that is kind of an interesting meditative picture about the nature of mortality. It tells the story of a young woman who has a dream that she believes she's going to die, and then ends up finding out that, yeah, that's probably going to happen for real. And when she tries discussing this idea with friends of hers, it's almost as if they become infected with the same notion, and they all begin thinking the same thing, that this notion is contagious. And they wrestle with the idea in the same way that she wrestles with that idea. It's an interesting film from the standpoint of, not only dealing with the question of mortality, but also from the standpoint of seeing how easily fear can spread among people. Mm-hmm. And it's especially timely in light of what's happened over the past year, especially given the fact that this movie was made before the pandemic.
Yes.
So now the one thing about this film is it's not really told so much in a way of being like a linear expository story. It's sort of like a collection of segments that are sewn together. And that's why I call it meditative, because you see what each of these individual characters goes through in response to this central issue that the lead character experienced at the beginning of the film. It's got beautiful cinematography, and it was nominated for an Independent Spirit Award for Best Cinematography. And it's got a very interesting score. But I also really like the writing. A lot of the writing is really hilarious. It just seems like some of the stuff comes from off the wall, but at a time when you think your time is getting very close to running out, you might want to say to yourself, okay, what do I want to get in while I still have time left? And these like really crazy thoughts will start coming into your mind about, well, what about this? Well, what about that? It almost reminded me of like the sort of the nutty emergency shopping that a lot of people did when the pandemic first broke last year, and they go into the supermarket and start buying all kinds of things that they would never purchase, So that's the kind of the reaction that these people start to have in terms of facing their impending mortality. This will definitely not be everybody's cup of tea, simply because of the way the film is put together. Some people may find some of the off-the-wall humor to be just completely strange, but I have a rather strange sense of humor at times, so I appreciated it. It's something that not a lot of people necessarily want to face. It's a question that people try to keep putting off and say, well, we'll deal with it someday. But when it comes up in your face, as it does here, sometimes you don't have the choice of being able to do that.
Yeah, I agree. You made some really key points, and that's exactly where I came at it after the fact. Because when I first started watching it, I was like, what is this? And it's labeled as a psychological thriller. And I'm not that's not my movie genre to begin with. So I was like, I'll give it a shot. And immediately I was like, oh, good God, what am I watching? Then I walked away, and then I came back and I was like, okay, I'm expecting a lot. We've got Michelle Rodriguez, we've got Jane Addams, Chris Messina, Josh. Like, I expected some really great feelings. I expected great theater. I expected a lot. So that was my bad number 2. And then when it was very scattered and I was like, oh, my mind was just kind of all over the place and trying to piece it together. That was my mistake number 3, is I was trying to very quickly trying to piece it together. And then when it all wrapped up and put a bow on it, I was like, dynamite, really great, because before the pandemic, and it really made me realize how contagious fear is. And
Exactly.
how much in the past 15 months, I personally have been infected with fear. And although I didn't face my mortality to a sense, it's panic, right? It's the same kind of lines of anxiety, panic, a sense of soothing though at some point, because you have to surrender. You
Yes.
have no control.
Exactly.
So that part of it I thought was bang on. I was like, okay, that's great. But again, I had my own misconceptions and my own errors when I first started watching it.
I read some information that was supplied by the director, and she said she really hates films that do linear expository prose.
Yeah.
She really likes doing more of the atmospheric, mood, meditative kinds of work, as is exhibited here.
Mm-hmm.
And if somebody is not expecting that, or somebody is not accustomed to watching movies like that, they might look at this and say, what the hell is going on here?
Yep.
But if you're willing to give that a chance and take the pieces collectively,
absolutely,
especially when you mull over it after the fact.
Yeah, it was after the fact. That's right. After. Yes. At the time, I was like, I'm lost. And I'm trying to just figure it out. But you're right. It's after the fact.
That's when people really get a clear picture of what the director was trying to do, and where the film was trying to go. So I will offer that caution to anybody who wants to take this one on in advance, saying don't expect the typical straightforward storyline that you might expect from a lot of other films, because you won't get that.
Yeah,
but if you're willing to give something a little bit more experimental a chance, definitely give this one a watch.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And why did you pick this one?
Well, this one and also the next one I'm talking about, I thought they were both really interesting in terms of the way they address the question of mortality.
Yep.
And it's something that, as I'm getting on in years myself, I'm increasingly having to face myself. I feel that for many of us, better off will be if we address that sooner rather than later, so that we're not having to scramble at the last minute the way these characters are, when they're like, oh my God, I'm going to die tomorrow. What do I need to do in that remaining time? That kind of thing.
But did you find that, and as I was like, oh my gosh, I'm dying tomorrow, like that feeling, none of the characters had that. They all had this sense of, well, maybe not all of them. I take that back. There was only a couple actually that had this sense of peace to them, that it was an acceptance. It really was this, oh, okay, well, I'm going to die tomorrow.
It's sort of like taking the 5 steps of death that Elizabeth Kubler-Ross talks about and condensing them into a really short time frame very quickly. Well, I'm not trying to go through each one of these, so I'll put them all together at the same time.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, how many stars for this one?
I would give this one 3.5.
Okay, perfect. Okay, we've got one more, and we're heading to the end of our hour here together, Brent. So I definitely want to talk about this one. Let's go.
All right. This is the final film is a movie called French Exit, which tells the story of a wealthy socialite who suddenly finds herself broke. And in order to maintain a lifestyle that she's accustomed to, she needs to come up with an alternative plan to make her life as meaningful as she possibly can. So she ends up selling all of her possessions from her late husband, taking the money and moving with her son to Paris. And while she's in Paris, she ends up discovering that she's living a very different life from what she was accustomed to. And in the course of that, she ends up having a whole variety of meditations on a variety of different subjects: mortality, friendship, family, parenting, love, you name it. I mean, she really addresses all these different subjects across the board. And she does so by interacting with a variety of very interesting characters. And you end up seeing a lot of really unusual things in herself coming out as well. This is a tour de force performance for Michelle Pfeiffer. I mean, she is just terrific in this role, as is are her co-stars. I mean, they're all very, very quirky, very unusual, but they all add to her experience in terms of giving you perspectives on somebody who maybe hasn't addressed some of these issues in her life before, but now is at the point where she needs to. And this certainly gives her the opportunity to do so. Mm-hmm. Now, this one, some viewers may find this a hard view because it does seem a bit disjointed, and I won't disagree with them on that. However, in terms of the areas that they cover, I believe that they're very important subjects to be addressed. And this is another one that has a lot of really off the wall, funny stuff in it. I mean, it's very French in many ways. I mean, just some of the stuff that went on in this movie, I just said, what the hell? I mean, yeah. So yeah, this is an interesting choice. Again, it won't be everyone's cup of tea, but it's if nothing else, it's really worth it just for watching the performance of Michelle Pfeiffer.
She's brilliant. I adore Michelle Pfeiffer, and I thought she was just so brilliant in this movie. Yeah. She's beautiful, and she's just so talented. All the actors in the movie I thought were as well. The storyline I thought was really engaging, but you're right, it was quirky. There was many times when I was just like, I'd be laughing and then I'd be, just confused, and then I'd be laughing some more. I thought it was really great.
And Michelle Pfeiffer's character at times is pretty repulsive too.
Yeah, she is.
And you look at her, you're like, how could anybody dare do something like that? But then a lot of times the things that she would end up doing were like really funny too on top of it. So, it's sort of a guilty pleasure kind of laughter in many ways.
Yeah, her and her son have a very unique relationship as well. And yeah, her character is very, yeah, you're either going to like her or you're not going to like her.
Well, she's very self-absorbed, obviously.
Oh, yes.
But she's also
but she's got this beautiful heart. Yes. And she's very compassionate and very empathetic.
And you also feel a great deal of sympathy for her because she obviously went through some very painful experiences in this film. Well, not in the film. She goes through some very painful experiences in her life that are never completely fully explained.
Yeah. Yeah. There's an underline for sure.
You know that she's got a past, that she's had past hurts. So part of you wants to kind of cut her some slack.
Yeah.
Because of that, even though you don't necessarily know what you're cutting her slack for.
Absolutely. Absolutely. You do. You really root for her.
Yes. Yes. And of course, a film in Paris is always a joy.
Oh, beautiful. I was like, get me back on the plane. It's gorgeous. Yes. Yes. The setting is stunning. And she's classy and she's just so demure and she's just so almost, what's the word I'm looking for? She is really dark and hidden, but very self-absorbed and really pained. You can tell, and the way she treats people and the way she talks to people, but yet her relationship with her best friend. Yes. And that was the first one. That was the first relationship that you really saw. And you're like, oh, okay. So all these, stereotypes that I've already, or these views that I've already thought about her, conclusions are really not there. So then I started reevaluating her again and looking at her differently after that.
A very complicated character.
Yeah. Yeah. So good though. She did dynamite. I loved it.
So as far as the reason I picked it, well, again, like the previous film we discussed, I like the meditative standpoint, addressing the big issues. Mm-hmm. And as far as the number of stars, I would give it 3 out of 5.
Yeah, perfect. Yeah. No, it was really good. And I can't believe it. Our time is up, Brent. How quickly did that go?
Flies. It always
I
flies.
enjoyed this so much. Thank you
Me too.
so much for allowing me to be part of this. And I'll extend that on to Frankie as well. It was for personally, it just really brought me back to something that I really love doing that I haven't in a long time. And just to be watching movies that I normally wouldn't be my go-to. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure. Glad you enjoyed it.
Yeah,
I enjoyed it
did.
too.
Oh, perfect. Okay, thanks for your time.
Thanks,
Anybody,
Danielle.
please, I recommend that anybody reach out to you. Go to your website, Brent Marchant at Brent, marchant.com to learn more about you, the books, your author, and all the other projects that you're involved in.
And there's also blogs on the main page of the Good Media Network as well.
Absolutely. Thanks for making a point of that. Talk to you soon. Thanks
Take
again.
care. Thanks.
Bye.
Bye-bye.